Hi and welcome back to the AQA GCSE History Elizabeth I Revision Series. This is episode 15 and we're looking at the Spanish Armada. King Philip II of Spain decided to launch an attack in the spring of 1588 on England. Philip appointed the Duke of Medina Sidonia to lead the Armada. He was very little sailing experience, but he was very wealthy and would obey Philip's instructions. They had 130 ships, 64 of which were battleships, 22 galleons, and 45 converted merchant ships. 30,000 men were on board the fleet and 20,000 soldiers were on land in Netherlands. Then they were going to collect them to fight on land in England. They had poor food and water supplies due to Drake's raid on Cadiz a year earlier. They had 2,000 large cannons that only worked at a short distance. Their tactics were to get close to the English to use their cannons and grappling hooks to get aboard and fight. Queen Elizabeth was preparing for the incoming attack of the Spanish Armada. Commanded by Lord Howard of Effingham, who had little experience but was very wealthy, so kept the nobles happy. But Sir Francis Drake and Sir John Hawkins were both experienced sailors and sea fighters, so they also helped to lead the English navy. They had 200 ships, 54 strong, light and fast battleships, 140 converted merchant ships. They had 14,000 men aboard and 20,000 sailors in England. They had fresh food supplied daily. They had 200 smaller cannons that could fire over long distances and were very quick to load. Their tactics were to fire the enemy ships from a long distance to avoid a counterattack. The Armada set out in May of 1588, but was delayed for several weeks by bad weather in the Bay of Biscay, and by the attempts of an English fleet to intercept it. In July, the Spanish fleet was sighted off Cornwall, and beacons were lit along the south coast to send the news to Elizabeth in London. English ships set sail from Plymouth to meet the Armada. The Armada sailed up the Channel in a crescent formation. This was an effective descent strategy, which used large armed galleons to protect the weaker supplies and troop ships. The English navy carried out a few minor raids, but was unable to inflict much damage. Only 2 Spanish ships were lost, and these were both destroyed by accident. Having sailed up the Channel, Medina Sidonia anchored at Calais to wait for the Duke of Parma's troops. However, Parma and his men were being blockaded by the Dutch ships and were unable to reach the coast in time. In the middle of the night, the English sent 8 fire ships among the anchored Spanish ships. This caused panic among the Spanish sailors, who cut their anchor cables, broke their defence formation and headed for the open sea. The Spanish ships regrouped at Gravelines, but the weather made it impossible for them to return to their defence position at Calais. The English moved in, and their following battle lasted for many hours. 5 Spanish ships were sunk, and the rest forced to sail into the North Sea. Parma's army were never collected. The English navy had defeated the Armada, and the Spanish ships now faced a dangerous journey home. Medina de Sidonia decided to call off the attack on England and return to Spain by sailing around Scotland and Ireland. The Spanish sailors were unfamiliar with this very dangerous route, and they encountered several powerful Atlantic storms. Many ships sank or were wrecked by the Scottish and Irish coasts, where the local inhabitants showed the survivors little mercy. Those ships that completed the journey ran short of supplies, and many men died of starvation and disease. Overall, less than half the fleet and fewer than 10,000 men made it back to Spain. Several factors contributed to the defeat of the Armada, one being luck. The death of Spain's leading admiral Santa Cruz in February of 1588 led to the appointment of the inexperienced Duke of Medina Sidonia to lead the Armada. The weather made it impossible for the Spanish fleet to return to the Channel after the Battle of Gravelines, forcing it to travel into dangerous waters off the coast of Scotland and Ireland. Another one was Spanish weaknesses. Most of Spain's men lacked experience of naval warfare, whereas the English fleet was manned by experienced sailors. The Spanish plan to meet the Duke of Parma at Dunkirk was flawed. Spain didn't control a deep-water port where the Armada could anchor safely, so the ships were extremely vulnerable to attack while they waited for Parma's troops to escape the Dutch blockade. Another factor was English strengths. The English had improved their shipbuilding, giving them several technological advantages. Spain relied on large ships which were heavy and difficult to handle, whereas the English built long, narrow ships which were much faster and easier to sail. English cannons could also be reloaded much faster than the Spanish ones. English tactics were much more effective. Spanish ships aimed to come alongside their opponents, board their vessels, and overcome the enemy in hand-to-hand fighting. The Spanish couldn't use this tactic because the English ships were just too fast. Philip sent 2 further armadas in the 1590s, but they were both unsuccessful. Although war with Spain continued for 15 years, the Armada of 1588 was the last serious Spanish threat to Elizabeth's throne. The victory of 1588 contributed to England's development as a strong naval power to rival Spain. English ships were sent on many voyages of discovery and established many valuable trading routes, especially with India and the Far East. By the end of Elizabeth's reign, the Navy was also playing an important role in attempts to set up English colonies in North America. On the 8th of August, after the main danger was over, Elizabeth went to speak to her English troops at Tilbury. She said, "I have but the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and think foul scorn that any prince of Europe should dare to invade the borders of my realm." The English navy were given medals with the inscription, "He blew with his winds and they were scattered," suggesting that God preferred Protestantism, and this improved Elizabeth's popularity and strengths. If you want to find out more about the Spanish Armada, I've linked several documentaries in the description below that I thought were really good and I suggest that you should watch. So that's the end of episode 15 of the AQA GCSE History Elizabeth I Revision Series. Next episode we'll be looking at the end of Elizabeth's reign. Thank you for watching and I hope you enjoyed.